This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Truth About Jesus. Is He a Myth? By Mangasar, Mangasarian. Read by Stephen Collins. The Jesus Story, a Religious Drama. We have now progressed far enough in our investigation to pause a moment for reflection before we proceed any further. I am conscious of no intentional misrepresentation or suppression of the facts relating to the question in hand. If I've erred through ignorance, I shall correct any mistakes I have made, if some good reader will take the trouble to enlighten me. I am also satisfied that I have not commanded the evidence, but have allowed the evidence to command me. I am not interested in either proving or disproving the existence of the New Testament Jesus. I am not an advocate. I am rather an umpire, who hears the evidence and pronounces his decision accordingly. Let the lawyers or the advocates argue pro and con. I only weigh, and I am sure, impartially, the evidence which the witnesses offer. We have heard and examined quite a number of these, and I, at least, am compelled to say that unless stronger evidence be forthcoming, a historical Jesus has not been proven by the evidence thus far taken in. This does not mean that there is no evidence whatever that Jesus was a real existence, but that the evidence is not enough to prove it. To condemn or to acquit a man in a court of law, there must not only be evidence, but enough of it to justify a decision. There is some evidence for almost any imaginable proposition, but that is not enough. Not only does the evidence offered to prove Jesus' historicity, already examined, fail to give this assurance, but, on the contrary, it lends much support to the opposite supposition, namely, that in all probability Jesus was a myth, even as Mithra, Osiris, Isis, Hercules, Samson, Adonis, Moses, Attis, Hermes, Hercules, Apollo of Tyana, Krishna, and Indra were myths. The story of Jesus, we are constrained to say, possesses all the characteristics of a religious drama, full of startling episodes, thrilling situations, dramatic action, and denouement. It reads more like a play than plain history. From such evidence as the Gospels themselves furnish, the conclusion that he was no more than the principal character in a religious play receives much support. Mystery and morality plays are of a very ancient origin. In earlier times, almost all popular instruction was by means of tableau vivant. As a great scenic or dramatic performance, with Jesus as the hero, Judas as the villain, with conspiracy as its plot, and the trial, the resurrection, and ascension as its finale, the story is intelligent enough. For instance, as the curtains rise, it discloses upon the stage shepherds tending their flocks in the green fields under the moonlit sky. Again, as the scene shifts, the clouds break, the heavens open, and voices are heard from above, with a white-winged chorus chanting an anthem. The next scene suggests a stable, with the cattle in their stalls, munching hay. In a corner of the stable, close to a manger, imagine a young woman stooping to kiss a newly born babe. Anon appear three bearded and richly costumed men, with presents in their hands, bowing their heads in ecstatic adoration. Surely enough, this is not history. It does not read like history. The elements of fiction run through the entire Gospels, and it is warp and woof. A careful analysis of the various incidents in this ensemble will not fail to convince the unprejudiced reader that while they possess all the essentials for dramatic presentation, they lack the requirements of real history. The open heavens, angel choirs, grazing flocks, watchful shepherds, worshipping magicians, the stable crib, the mother and child, the wonderful star, the presents, the anthem. All these, while they fit admirably as stage settings, are questionable material for history. No historical person was ever born in so spectacular a manner. The Gospel accounts of Jesus is an embellished, ornamental, even sensational dramatic creation to serve as an introduction for a legendary hero. Similarly, theatrical furniture has been used thousands of times to introduce other legendary characters. All the Savior gods were born supernaturally. They were all half God, half man. They were all of royal descent. Miracles and wonders attended their birth. Jesus was not an exception. We reject as mythical the birth stories about Mithra and Apollo. Why accept as history those about Jesus? It rests with the preachers of Christianity to show that while the God-man of Persia, or of Greece, for example, was a myth, the God-man of Palestine is historical. The dramatic element is again plainly seen in the account of the betrayal of Jesus. Jesus, who preaches daily in the temples and in public places, who talks to the multitude on the mountain and at the seaside, who feeds thousands by miracles. The report of those wonderful cures has reached the ends of the earth, and who is often followed by such a crush that to reach him an opening has to be made in the ceiling of the house where he is stopping, who goes in and out before the people and is constantly disputing with the elders and leaders of the nation, is, nevertheless, represented as being so unknown that his enemies have to resort to the device of bribing with 30 silver coins one of his disciples to point him out to them, and which is to be done by a kiss. This might make a great scene upon the stage, but it is not with the way things happen in life. Then read how Jesus is carried before Pilate, the Roman governor, and how while he is being tried a courier rushes in with a letter from Pilate's wife, in which is dramatically torn open and read aloud in the presence of a crowded court. The letter, it is said, was about a dream of Pilate's wife, in which some ghost tells her that Jesus is innocent, that her husband should not proceed against him. Is this history? Roman jurisprudence had not degenerated to an extent as to permit the dreams of a woman or of a man to influence the course of justice. But this latter episode was invented by the playwright, if I may use that phrase, to prolong the dramatic suspense, to complicate the situation, to twist the plot, and thereby render the impression produced by its piece more lasting. The letter and the dream did not save Jesus. Pilate was not influenced by his dreaming wife. She dreamed in vain. In the next place we hear Pilate pronouncing Jesus guiltless, but, forthwith, he hands him over to the Jews to be killed. Does this read like history? Did ever a Roman court witness such a trial? To pronounce a man innocent, and then to say to his prosecutors, "If you wish to kill him, you may do so," is extraordinary conduct. Then, proceeding, Pilate takes water and ostentatiously washes his hands, a proceeding introduced by a Greek or Latin scribe, who wished, in all probability, to throw the blame of the crucifixion entirely upon the Jews. Pilate, representing the Gentile world, washes his hands of the responsibility of the death of Jesus, while the Jews are made to say, "His blood be upon us and our children." Imagine the clamor, howling Jews, trampling on one another, gesticulating furiously, gnashing their teeth, foaming at the mouth, and spitting in one another's face as they shout, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" A powerful stage setting, to be sure. But is it impossible to imagine that such disorder, such anarchy, could be permitted in any court of justice? But think once more of those terrible words placed in the mouths of the Jews, "His blood be upon us and our children." Think of the people openly cursing themselves and asking the whole Christian world to persecute them forever. "His blood be upon us and our children." Next, the composers of the Gospels conduct us to the Garden of Gethsemane, that we may see there the hero of the play in his agony, fighting the great battle of his life alone, with neither help nor sympathy from his distracted followers. He is shown to us there, on his knees, crying tears of blood, sobbing and groaning under the shadow of an almost crushing fear. Tremblingly he prays, "Let this cup pass from me, if it be possible." And then, yielding to the terror crowding upon him, he sighs in the hearing of all the ages, "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Precisely the excuse given by everybody for not doing what they would do if they could. Now, we ask in all seriousness, is it likely that a God who had come down from heaven purposely to drink that cup, and to be the martyr savior of humanity, would seek to be spared the fate for which he was ordained from all eternity? The objection that Jesus' hesitation on the eve of the crucifixion, as well as his cry of despair on the cross, were meant to show that he was as human as he was divine, does not solve the difficulty. In that event, Jesus, then, was merely acting, feigning a fear which he did not feel, and pretending to dread a death which he knew could not hurt him. If, however, Jesus really felt alarmed at the approach of death, how much braver, then, were many of his followers who afterwards faced dangers and tortures far more cruel than his own. We honestly think to have put in Jesus' mouth the words above quoted, and also to have represented him as closing his public career with a shriek on the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" was tantamount to an admission by the writers that they were dealing with a symbolic Christ, an ideal figure, the hero of a play, and not a historical character. It is highly dramatic, to be sure, to see the sun darkened, to feel the whole earth quaking, to behold the graves ripped open, the dead reappear in their shrouds, to hear the hero himself tearing his own heart with the cry of shuddering anguish, my God, my God! But it is not history. If such a man as Jesus really lived, then his biographers have only given us a caricature of him. How beautiful of some of the sayings attributed to Jesus, and whatever the source they may have been borrowed from, they are not enough to prove his historicity. But even as the Ten Commandments do not prove Moses to have been a historical personage, or the author of the books and deeds attributed to him, neither do the parables and miracles of Jesus prove him to have once visited this earth as a god, or to have even existed as a man. Socrates and Jesus. Compare the quite natural behavior of Socrates in prison with that of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. The Greek sage is serene. Jesus is alarmed. The night agony of his soul, his tears of blood, his pitiful collapse when he prays, "If it be possible, let this cup pass from me." All this would be very impressive on the boards, but they seem incredible of a real man engaged in saving a world. Once more we say that the defense that it was the man in Jesus and not the God in him that broke down would be unjust to the memory of thousands of martyrs who died by more terrible death than that of Jesus. As elsewhere stated, but which cannot be too often emphasized, what man would not have embraced death with enthusiasm, without a moment's misgiving, did he think that by his death and sin would be no more? Who would shrink from a cross which is going to save millions to millions added from eternal burnings? He must be a phantom, indeed, who trembles and cries like a frightened child because he cannot have the crown without the cross. What a spectacle for the real heroes crowding the galleries of history! It is difficult to see the shrieking and shuddering Savior of the world, his face bathed in perspiration, blood oozing out of his forehead, his lips pale, his voice breaking into a shriek, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" It is difficult to witness all this and not pity him. Poor Jesus! He is going to save the world, but who is going to save him? If we compare the trial of Jesus with that of Socrates, the fictitious nature of the former cannot possibly escape detection. Socrates was so well known in Athens that it was not necessary for his accusers to bribe one of his disciples to betray him. Jesus should have been even better known in Jerusalem than Socrates was in Athens. He was daily preaching in the synagogues, and his miracles had given him éclat, which Socrates did not enjoy. Socrates is not given to court at night, bound hand and feet. Jesus is arrested in the glare of torchlights after he is betrayed by Judas with a kiss. Then he is bound and forced into the high priest's presence. All this is admirable setting for a stage, but they are no more than that. The disciples of Socrates behave like real men. Those of Jesus are actors. They run away. They hide and follow at a distance. One of them curses him. The cock crows. The apostle repents. This reads like a play. In the presence of his judges, Socrates makes his own defense. One by one he meets the charges. Jesus refused, or according to two of the evangelists, to open his mouth at his trial. This is dramatic, but it is not history. It is not conceivable that a real person, accused as Jesus was, would have refused a great opportunity to disprove the charges against him. Socrates' defense of himself is one of the classics. Jesus' silence is a conundrum. But he answered nothing. But Jesus as yet answered nothing. And he answered him never a word, is the report of two of his biographers. The two other evangelists, as is usual, contradict the former, and produce the following dialogues between Jesus and his judges, which from beginning to end possesses all the marks of unreality. Pilate: Art thou the king of the Jews? Jesus: Sayest thou this thing of thyself, or did others tell it thee of me? Pilate: Art thou a king? Jesus: Thou sayest I am a king. Is it possible that a real man, not to say the Savior of the world, would give such unmeaning and evasive replies to straightforward questions? Does it not read like a page from fiction? In the presence of the priests of his own race, Jesus is as indefinite and sophistical as he is before the Roman Pilate. The priests: Art thou the Christ? Tell us. Jesus: If I tell you, ye will not believe me. The priests: Art thou the Son of God? Jesus: Ye say that I am. In the first answer he refuses to reveal himself because he does not think he can command belief in himself. In the second answer he either blames them for saying he was the Son of God, or quotes their own testimony to prove that he is the Son of God. But if they believe he was God, would they try to kill him? Is it not unthinkable? He intimates that the priests believe he is the Son of God. Ye say that I am. Surely, it is more probable that these dialogues were invented by the anonymous biographers than that they really represent an actual conversation between Jesus and his judges. Compare in the next place the manner in which the public trials of Socrates and Jesus are conducted. There is order in the Athenian court. There is anarchy in the Jerusalem court. Witnesses and accusers walk up to Jesus and slap him on the face, and the judge does not reprove them for it. The court is in the hands of the rowdies and the hoodlums, who shout, "Crucify him," and again, "Crucify him." A Roman judge, while admitting that he finds no guilt in Jesus deserving of death, is nevertheless represented as handing him over to the mob to be killed. After he has himself scourged him, no Roman judge could have behaved as this Pilate is reported to have behaved toward an accused person on trial for his life. All that we know of civilized government, all that we know of the jurisprudence of Rome, contradicts this inspired account of a pretend historical event. If Jesus was ever tried and condemned to death in a Roman court, an account of it that can command belief has yet to be written. Again, when we come to consider the random, disconnected, and fragmentary form in which the teachings of Jesus are presented, we cannot avoid the conclusion that it is a dramatis persona, brought up on the stage to give expression not to the consistent, connected, and careful worked-out thought, but to voice with many breaks and interruptions the ideas of his changing managers. He is made to play a number of contradictory roles, and appears in the same story in totally different characters. One editor or compiler of the Gospel describes Jesus as an ascetic and a mendicant, wandering from place to place, without a roof over his head, and crawling at eventide into his cave in the Mount of Olives. He introduces him as the man of sorrows, fasting in the wilderness, counseling people to part with their riches, and promising the kingdom of heaven to Lazarus, the beggar. Another redactor announces him as eating and drinking, and the banquets of publicans and sinners, a wine-bibbing Son of Man. John the Baptist came neither eating nor drinking, but the Son of Man came both eating and drinking, which, if it means anything, means that Jesus was the very opposite of the ascetic John. A partisan of the doctrine of non-resistance puts Jesus' mouth the words, "Resist not evil, the meek shall inherit the earth," etc., and counsels that he who smites us on one cheek should be permitted to strike us also on the other, and that to him who robs us of an undergarment, we should also hand over our outer garments. Another draws the picture of a militant Jesus, who could never endure such precepts as indolence and resignation. "The kingdom of heaven is taken by violence," cries this new Jesus, and intimates that no such beggar like Lazarus, seen all day long with the dogs and his sores, can ever earn so great a prize. With a scourge in his hand, this Jesus rushes upon the traders in the temple court, upturns their tables, and whips their owners into the streets. Surely this was resistance of the most pronounced type. The right to use physical force could not have been given a better endorsement than by this example of Jesus. It will not help matters to say that these money changers were violating divine law, and needed chastisement with a whip. Is not the man who smites us upon the cheek, or robs us of our clothing, equally guilty? Moreover, these traders in the outer court of the synagogue were rendering the worshippers a useful service. Just as candles, rosaries, images, and literature are sold in church vegetables for the accommodation of Catholics, so were doves, pigeons, and Hebrew coins, necessary to the Jewish sacrifices, sold in the temple courts for the Jewish worshippers. The money changers who supplied the pious Jew with the only sacred coin which the priest would accept was not very much less important to the Jewish religion than the rabbi. To have fallen upon these trades with a weapon, and to have caused them the loss of their property, was certainly the most inconsistent thing that a meek and lowly Jesus preaching non-resistance could have done. Again, one writer makes Jesus the teacher, par excellence, of peace. He counsels forgiveness of injuries, not 7 times, but 70 times that number, meaning unlimited love and charity. Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, is his usual advice. But another hand retouches this picture, and we have a Jesus who breaks his own golden rule. This other Jesus heaps abuses upon the people who displeases him, calls his enemies vipers, serpents, devils, and predicts for them an eternal burnings in sulfur and brimstone. How could he who said, "Come unto me, all ye that are heavy laden," say also, "Depart from me, ye cursed"? Who cursed them? How can there be an everlasting hell in a universe whose author advises us to love our enemies, to bless them that curse us, and to forgive 70 times 7? How could the same Jesus who said, "Blessed are the peacemakers," say also, "I came not to bring peace, but a sword"? Is it possible that the same Jesus who commands us to love our enemies commands us also to hate father, mother, wife, and child, for his name's sake? Yes, the same Jesus who said, "Put up thy sword in its sheath," also commands us to sell our effects and buy a sword. Once more, a believer in the divinity of Jesus, I am going to say, invents the following text: "The Father and I are one." An opponent to this Trinitarian dogma introduces a correction which robs the above text of its authority. "The Father is greater than I," and makes Jesus admit openly that there are some things known to the Father only. It is difficult not to see these passages the beginning of terrible controversies which, starting with Peter and Paul, have come down to our day, and which will not end until the Jesus shall take his place among the mythical saviors of the world. To harmonize these and many different Jesuses into something like unity or consistency, 1,000 books have been written by the clergy. They have not succeeded. How can a Jesus represented at one time as the image of divine perfection, and at another as protesting against the being called good, for none is good save one, God? How can these two conceptions be reconciled except by a resort to artificial and arbitrary interpretations? If such insurmountable contradictions in the teachings and character of another would weaken our faith in his historicity, then we are justified in fearing that in all probability Jesus was only a name, the name of an imaginary stage hero, uttering the conflicting thoughts of his prompters. Again, such phrases as, "and he was caught up in the cloud," describing the ascension and consequent disappearance of Jesus, betray the anxiety of the authors of the Gospels to bring their marvelous story to a close. Not knowing how to terminate the career of an imaginary Messiah, its creators invented the above method of dispatching him. He was caught up in a cloud, but for that the narrators would have been obliged to continue their story indefinitely. In tragedy the play ends with the death of the hero, but if the biographies of Jesus had given a similar excuse for bringing their narrative to a finale, there would have been the danger of their being asked to point out his grave. He was caught up in a cloud, relieved of all responsibility to produce his remains if called upon to do so, and, at the same time, furnish them with an excuse to bring their story to a close. It would hardly be necessary, were we all unbiased, to look for any further proofs of the mythical and fanciful nature of the gospel narratives than this expedient to which the writers resorted. To questions, "Where is Jesus? What became of his body?" etc., they could answer, "He was caught up in a cloud." But a career that ends in the clouds was never begun on earth. Let us imagine ourselves in Jerusalem in the year 1 of the Christian era, and the apostles, as it is claimed, were proclaiming Jesus as the Messiah, crucified and risen. Desiring to be convinced before believing in the strange story, let us suppose the following conversation between the apostle and ourselves. We ask, "How long have you known Jesus?" "I have known him for 1 year." "And I for 2." "And I for 3." "Has any of you known him for more than 3 years?" "No." "Was he with his apostles for 1 year or for 3?" "For 1." "No, for 3." "Are you not certain, then, how long Jesus was with his apostles?" "No." "How old was Jesus when he was crucified?" "About 31. "No." "About 33. "No, he was much older, about 50. "You cannot tell with any certainty, then, his age at the time of his death?" "No." "You say he was tried and crucified in Jerusalem before your own eyes. Can you remember the date of this great event?" "We cannot." "Were you present when Jesus was taken down from the cross?" "We were not." "You cannot tell, then, whether he was dead when taken down?" "We have no personal knowledge." "Were you present when he was buried?" "We were not, because we were hiding for our lives." "You do not know, therefore, whether he was actually buried, or where he was buried?" "We do not." "Were any of you present when Jesus came forth from the grave?" "Not one of us was present." "Then, you were not with him when he was taken down from the cross, you were not with him when he was interred, you were not present when he rose from the grave?" "We were not." "When, therefore, you say he was dead, buried, and rose again, you are relying upon the testimony of others?" "We are." "Will you mention the names of some of the witnesses who saw Jesus come forth from the tomb?" "Mary Magdalene, and she is here and may be questioned." Were you present, Mary, when the angels rolled away the stone, and when Jesus came forth from the dead? No. When I reached the burying place early in the morning, the grave had already been vacated, and there was no one sleeping in it. You saw him, then, as the apostles did, after he had risen? Yes. But you did not see anybody rise out of the grave. I did not. Are there any witnesses who saw the resurrection? There are many who saw him after the resurrection. But if neither they nor you saw him dead and buried, and did not see him rise, either, how can you tell that the most astounding and supposedly impossible miracle had taken place between the time you saw him last and when you saw him again, 2 or 3 days after? Is it not more natural to suppose that, being in a hurry on account of the approaching Sabbath, Jesus, if ever crucified, was taken down from the cross before he had really died, and that he was not buried, as rumor states, but remained in hiding, and is showing himself to you under cover of darkness and in secluded spots in the dead of night only, would seem to confirm this explanation? You admit also that the risen Jesus did not present himself at the synagogues of the people, in the public streets, or at the places of the high priest to convince him of his messiahship. Do you not think that if he had done this, it would have been impossible to deny his resurrection? Why, then, did Jesus hide himself after he came out of the grave? Why did he not show himself also to his enemies? Was he still afraid of them, or did he not care whether they believed or not? If so, why are you trying to convert them? The question waits for his reasonable answer. Why did not Jesus challenge the whole world with the evidence of his resurrection? You say you saw him occasionally, a few moments at a time, now here and now there, and finally on top of the mountain whence he was caught up in the cloud and disappeared altogether. But that cloud has melted away, the sky is clear, and there is no Jesus visible there. The cloud, then, had nothing to hide. It was unnecessary to call in a cloud to close the career of your Christ. The grave is empty, the cloud has vanished. Where is Christ? In heaven? Ah! You have at last removed him to a world unknown, to the undiscovered country. Leave him there. Criticism, doubt, investigation, the light of day, cannot cross its shores. Leave him there. This ends the Jesus story, a religious drama.